Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Chris Sununu. Welcome to NewsNation. Chris Cuomo, that other Chris, he's off tonight doing his first responder training. But nevertheless, we have a great show for you. From Diddy to Dershowitz, you are all in for a very interesting hour. But before we dive into those topics, I want to take a step back. I am going to register a complaint now that I am no longer a sitting governor. I guess I finally feel like I have a chance to add my own 2 cents to the frustrated masses out there. So, when I was governor, I found very creative ways to always look to solicit feedback from the public, right? For a while, we had a giant suggestion box sitting in my State House office. At one point, I thought it'd be fun. We had an antique payphone in our reception area. You could come in and leave a direct message for the governor just to solicit that kind of feedback. Tourist visitors, they could walk around and kind of ink their 2 cents, so to say. Now, just going out grocery shopping sometimes, I mean, that's the other way. You kind of find your ways to avoid security. You really find your way to connect with folks. And was it just a fun thing to do, an interesting way to say you're staying connected? No. Why did I do all this? Because, well, aside from the extraordinary humorous ways that people might have had of insulting me, it really comes down to self-awareness. Politicians, leadership, it's all about self-awareness. And if you don't perceive your own situation appropriately, then you clearly shouldn't be talking about policies or making decisions that can affect other people's lives. I've always believed that very strongly. And this week, we've seen a rash of examples of individuals that would do well to take a step outside of themselves, get some perspective. So yesterday we saw Ben Cohen, the famous Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's, arrested for disrupting the RFK Jr. Senate hearing because he's, quote, fighting for low-income families. And for those of you who don't know, Ben Cohen is the socialist, anti-capitalist entrepreneur who became a mega millionaire selling overpriced high-end ice cream to rich people. So you see the hypocrisy there. And it's not just Cohen that needs a reality check, but, you know, you can look at what the president has said. President Trump overseas this week touting his efforts to bring American manufacturing jobs back in for the middle-class America. That is a great idea, by the way. But then he says, oh, yeah, I'll accept a $400 billion jet from the Qatari royal family as a gift. Look, not only would that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to the taxpayer just to retrofit that thing, but it likely wouldn't even be ready for his use until after he leaves office. And then it gets transferred to the presidential library. But look, on top of all of it, it just looks bad. It just looks bad. And I implore the president not to accept it. I implore folks of all types and all walks within Washington and leadership to have a little more of that self-awareness. Remember Gavin Newsome? Right? I was there managing the pandemic in New Hampshire, so I'm a little partial to watching some other governors who walks into the French Laundry and not abiding by his own rules. Nancy Pelosi defending her perceived insider trading and doing next to nothing to stop other members of Congress from trading stocks. It's so blatantly transparent that a certain class of individuals gets to set the rules and play by a different set of those rules than everybody else. So, as long as there's that division, there will never be trust. And the only way to fix a broken federal government, and believe me, folks, it is a very broken federal government, and that's to make tough decisions. But those tough decisions are only possible with the trust of the people behind you. So my very long message here is let's hope they all start getting the message and start making some changes and connecting with folks that these policies really impact. So with that said, I'm going to bring in 2 politicians from both sides of the aisle. Democrat Representative Adam Smith from Washington, Republican Representative Dr. Rich McCormick from Georgia. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
I'm very hurt by the politician remark. I never thought of myself about that as a politician until just now. Thank you so much.
Well, look, my argument to kick this night off was, you know, always finding ways to connect with the constituents. So, look, Adam, let's start with you first. How do you connect with your constituents, other than maybe just the traditional town halls? How do you guys find your best ways to connect?
Well, we do a lot of meetings. We spend a lot of time in the district, and we meet with a wide variety of groups. And also, as you said, I've had many conversations with my constituents at the gym, at the grocery store, at my kids' soccer games, you know, living and being connected to the community. I think part of the problem, though, and Richard and I get along really well. We just spent time in Austin working on acquisition reform and DOD. There are some positive things going on. But I think we need to stop being afraid of being politicians. A politician is someone who is elected to represent people and try to solve problems. I mean, if you accept the fact that if you're a politician, by definition, there's a problem with that, well, then our whole representative democracy kind of falls apart. There's nothing wrong with being a politician. It's like any other profession. You got good ones and you got bad ones. And let's hold people to account and try to make sure that they're doing the right thing for the people that we're supposed to represent.
Representative McCormick, are you one that watches all the social media comments on you?
I can't do it anymore. I tried for a very short period. It just hurt my feelings. I used to be a popular guy. Everybody likes Marines. Everybody likes doctors. Everybody likes youth ministers. Then you become a politician. I was a student body president at a minority university. Everybody loved me. And then all of a sudden you go into politics and all of a sudden half the United States instantly hates you and says the most vile and disgusting things about you. It really hurt my feelings, actually.
Yeah, social media, nothing really good comes of it. But look, I want to get into the big, beautiful bill, what's going on in Congress. This is a very impactful bill, and especially as it deals with Medicaid, it touches a variety of other things, child tax credits. So if you don't mind, Representative Smith, I'm going to start with you. A lot of criticism on the bill, a lot of anger from the left in terms of, you're going to starve poor kids who can't get their SNAP benefits and all of this. Walk me through some of the biggest concerns that you guys have, and if there's a path to start brokering something.
Well, one of my biggest concerns is this is all supposedly being done because of concern about the debt and the deficit. And the bill actually adds about $2 trillion to the debt as it's currently constructed, in large part because of the tax cuts that are in it. And then there's a very good piece today, I think it was in the Washington Post, about how all of the tax cuts and all of the spending increases happen now. And all of the supposed cuts and tax cuts that go away happen 4 years from now, so that we're going to act like it's not really a problem and it's not adding to the debt. Look, and this is a bipartisan thing. And Richard and I actually talked about this when we were down in Austin. Democrats and Republicans, neither one are being honest about the debt and the deficit. And right now, the budget reconciliation bill with Republicans in charge is just a great example of blowing the doors off the debt and not being responsible.
So, Rich, is there a way, the $2.5 trillion over 10 years, that's a real number. As folks know, I'm a huge budget hawk myself. I think you would agree. It's a hard argument to make to the American people that we're going to cut back on some programs, but it's still going to cost us a little more.
Yeah, so that's the problem with having like 76% of your budget on mandatory spending. We're not allowed by the Byrd Rule to address Social Security, Medicare. The American people don't really have the stomach to address Medicaid in specific ways, and we're going to address Medicaid, but not really aggressively enough. And the problem is, and this is why I challenge both Republicans and Democrats to do, if you don't have something you're going to cut, what's your solution? I don't think increasing taxes is going to do it. You can't tax your way out of this. You're not going to grow your way out of this. This has to be a controlled spending. We are so high. We're so addicted. We're so far past our pre-COVID spending levels. Every time we have a crisis, we ramp it up, but we don't ramp it back down again. World War II, we had a reason to ramp it up, and then we ramped it back down again. After 2004, it started under a Republican president, George W. Bush, where we hugely increased government spending. And then we continued that in 2008 when we had a housing crisis. And then we continued again when we had COVID. But we've never come back down and said we're not addicted to spending problems. We are. We have a significant problem. And I'm one of those budget hawks, one of the 32 who signed a letter to the speaker saying enough is enough. Adam and I agree. We did talk recently. I really appreciate that talk, actually. We have to come to an agreement on what we're going to do to solve a real problem, or this next president. It won't come this presidency, but next presidency, it doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. You're going to see Social Security go bankrupt, Medicare go bankrupt, and the debt crisis will reach a crisis point, which actually you and I talked about in Savannah, too.
Without a doubt. And again, I think there's some common ground between all four of us, right? $2.5 trillion, the number's just going up, has to be addressed. And Medicaid, there's some good parts to it, but we all understand they do need reforms. It's unquestionable. So, Congressman Smith, are there reforms that you would like to see in this bill? Are there good parts to it? Are there salvageable pieces for the left where we can maybe find that common ground and get something done?
Well, I'm certain that there are. I do want to say I do think revenue is part of the issue. The other thing that we've done since 2001 is we've cut taxes repeatedly. And I always point out at this point to my constituents back home, I'm not talking about state and local taxes. State and local taxes, particularly in my state, I think are a significant problem. But on the federal level, we've cut every conceivable tax, and then we cut the IRS, so we can't even collect the taxes we're supposed to collect. So I think revenue is a piece of it, and that is the biggest concern. Healthcare needs to be reformed. We spend twice as much as any other country in the world on healthcare. And yet our results typically rank somewhere between 30th and 40th, in large part because we don't regulate it. We spend money on a wide variety of things that aren't really needed. I'll agree with RFK Jr. on something. I think advertising pharmaceuticals doesn't make any sense at all. I think we have a lot of people taking drugs they shouldn't be taking. The single biggest area that we could find savings is in healthcare, by being smarter about how we spend that money. And that certainly impacts Medicare and Medicaid. It also impacts all the federal employees' healthcare benefits. Federal government pays for a lot of healthcare, and we could be getting more for the money we're spending.
Are work requirements on the table? Is that a possibility for Democrats to say, yeah, especially for the expanded population of Medicaid with able-bodied working adults, we could get there on work requirements?
It's a possibility for me. I can't speak for all Democrats, and you'd have to be really specific about what those work requirements are. But sure, I think that can be part of it, in my opinion.
Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a change of attack here. So earlier, I think it was earlier today even, former FBI Director James Comey, he posted a message that he saw a bunch of seashells lined up on the beach that said 8647. And now some of my fellow conservatives are taking it as a threat to the president. I guess the big question is a bunch of seashells on the beach a threat to the president? Representative, I'll start with you, Representative McCormick.
Sometimes you guys surprise me. This surprises me. I'm not one of the conspiracy theory guys. There's always going to be people that want to do harm to the president, of course. I mean, there isn't a president who's lived in the last 100 years who hasn't had somebody try to kill him. There's been several presidents who've been murdered over time, and they're going to continue to try to. One seashell number is not going to worry me any more than anything else. There's some real trouble, though. If you look at technologies, if you look at how we can control drones now, they're very difficult to defeat. You can have wire-guided drones that could loiter in a certain area, waiting for you to facially identify somebody. This is a real security problem. I don't care if you're the president or a Supreme Court justice. This could be instrumental in some really violent things happening in America and abroad. As a guy who's part of the armed services, actually, you're looking at both of us right now. We're worried about the technologies and how it can be used against sitting politicians that could affect the outcome of this great nation.
Yeah. And Congressman Smith, I assume you'd agree, this kind of stuff is just a distraction from real threats, I imagine.
Well, two things. One, I think we need to acknowledge that the threats to elected officials are greater now than they've ever been during my time in service and in the last 30 or 40 years. And we've seen it. I mean, Governor Shapiro's, the mansion was attacked. Paul Pelosi, obviously the 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. There is an acceptance of violence, I believe, on both the far right and the far left that is deeply problematic. But saying that someone should be deep sixed as a president, that's part. Richard and I both, we got people who disagree with us. Fire Adam Smith. We need to get rid of him. That's not a physical threat. That's a political threat. And I think 8647 cannot be categorized as a threat. And it's not something that the internet and the social media world should be bothering themselves about.
I got to be, it took me a second. I used to work in a restaurant. They used to say 86 the dishes. I don't think it meant assassinate the dishes. I think it meant, hey, Sununu, get these dirty dishes out of here. Gentlemen, cannot thank you guys enough for taking the time. Really appreciate it. A lot of work to be done, but I think America's looking to folks like yourself to find that bridge and actually move the ball forward, especially on a lot of these healthcare issues that are really facing the nation. So thank you guys so much.
Good. Thanks, Chris.
Appreciate you. Thanks.
You bet. All right, coming up, the graphic and explicit testimony of Sean Diddy Combs' longtime girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. It continued today under cross-examination by the defense. Were they able to prove that Ventura was a willing and oftentimes eager, shall we say, participant in those drug-fueled freak-offs? The defense used years of text and other communications to prove just that, but did they succeed? We'll take you inside the courtroom, and then one of Diddy's longtime lawyers will weigh in with us coming up next. Yesterday, the prosecution used their star witness, Sean Diddy Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, to prove their case against the music mogul. Ventura testified that she was mentally and physically abused by Combs, and she was forced to participate in these drug-fueled freak-offs with paid sex workers. Well, today, the defense had their shot at Ventura. Their goal, to prove to the jury that she was a willing and often eager participant in those freak-offs. They did that by showing the jury more than 100 text messages between Combs and Cassie that spanned their nearly 10-year relationship, some of which directly referred to those freak-offs. And in one exchange, Combs asked Ventura if she wants to do a freak-off. And she responded, quote, I'm always ready to do a freak off. Combs said, you tell me when. And Cassie said, let's do a weekend so we can recover for work. But if a weekend doesn't work, I don't care. Well, NewsNation's Laura Ingle was in the courthouse today, and she joins me now. Laura, great to see you. Can you paint a picture for this audience of what this day was like?
You know, this was wild because we had, as you mentioned, Cassie Ventura on the stand being under direct examination from prosecutors the last 2 days. So we really kind of saw this sympathetic view of Cassie Ventura as she was talking about these freak-offs. And, of course, this is a key portion of this case against Sean Combs, talking about how she often felt humiliated at something that she didn't want to do, that she often became sick after these freak-offs. It was just too much. But today, under cross-examination, as you mentioned, you know, we saw kind of this different side, sort of this balancing act from the defense, putting up these dozens and dozens of text messages that went back and forth about the freak-offs. And to your point about that weekend and time to recover, that involved the lead-up to the 2016 incident that we saw at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. Of course, that very now famous video of the beating that Cassie took allegedly at the hands of Sean Combs. We have to keep saying allegedly. But as we watch that video, what happened before then? Well, that's what we're hearing from the defense, that in fact, she was the one, defense attorneys say, that wanted to do this freak off in that particular weekend, at that particular time, before her big movie premiere that was happening a few days later, so that they would have time to recover. So she was really kind of defending herself about that, saying, really, I wanted more damage control. I just kind of wanted to get it over with, so to speak, so that we could do it and I would have that time. So a lot of back and forth about who was in charge of all this. We also heard a lot about extreme jealousy from both sides. And Cassie Ventura talked about how jealous she was of many women in Sean Combs' life, including his ex, Kim Porter, who's the mother of a couple of his children. And she said, you know, she wanted to be the one to go on vacations with Sean Combs like Kim Porter did. She wanted to be more in a relationship like that with him. And we really have heard that over the last few days about how she was jealous of that type of relationship with Combs. And we also heard a lot about drugs. There were a lot of drugs and a long list of them that both of them took during these freak-offs and throughout their relationship through these 11 years: ecstasy, cocaine, THC, GHB, something that they in fact, actually led to a drug overdose Sean Combs had in 2012, something that was kind of a bombshell today. She talked about being a part of taking him to the hospital, and that was something that a lot of people didn't know about, and she says she was concerned for him. So a lot of bombshells today, a lot of people inside of court, families on both sides. Chris.
Well, hey, this is definitely going to keep going back and forth, Laura. We can't thank you enough for actually being on site and kind of bringing us what's really happening there. So now let's bring in criminal trial attorney Sara Azari. Sara, great to see you. Sara is one of Combs' longtime, and one of Combs, you weren't the longtime, one of Combs' longtime attorneys, Mark Geragos, whose daughter Tenny is on Diddy's current legal team. Mark, Sara, thank you guys for joining us. So Sara, one of the things that you see going back and forth here between these texts is really the prosecution. What the prosecution is going to have to do is convince the jury that she wasn't a willing participant, that she was kind of agreeing out of fear, right, for herself. How do you do that in that process? Can that actually be done?
You know, look, I'll be honest, I'm the prosecutor tonight, but this today was not good for the prosecution, but also wasn't shocking. I think they were expecting this. There was a lot of consent. There was a lot of autonomy in her testimony, and that all the testimony that we heard on direct, where there was violence intertwined with the freak-offs, I think the defense did a really good job at parsing that out and divorcing it. But she is the star witness. She's not the only witness. This trial just began, and I think that there's a lot that she's testified to that will go to the racketeering charge, even though the sex trafficking is probably, there's a lot of doubt there because of today's testimony.
Right. And Mark, I assume you would agree, a good day, I assume, for the defense. And again, does this give them momentum as they move forward? And is this exchange exactly what they were looking for?
Well, I saw some comments by her lawyer, Mr. Wigdor, outside, and he was saying things like the text of the text, it is what it is, and things along those nature. The kind of the fallback response when your client is being challenged, I suppose. The fact remains that I've never understood, maybe Sara, playing the prosecutor today, can tell me this. Why, if you're the government and you're supposed to be seeking the truth, and, you know, I won't attack or direct this at these particular prosecutors. I don't want to get sideways with anybody, but I've always wondered why in criminal trials, why prosecutors only give you half the truth. What are they afraid of? Why do they mislead jurors? Why do they not tell the jurors what it is? I mean, obviously, in any trial, you have to exchange discovery. So the prosecutors know these things are coming. Why do they hide it? Why do prosecutors not give the jury the whole picture? Why do they rely on the defense?
I think you know the answer because we want the conviction. We want the truth, but we don't have an obligation to present all the text messages. So we cherry pick what works for our case. And I think with Cassie today,
but that's actually, Sara, you know, in your day job as a criminal defense lawyer, how many times have I heard you argue that you have a different job as a criminal defense lawyer than a prosecutor does? Prosecutor's supposed to seek the truth. Defense lawyer is the one who's supposed to zealously advocate.
But in reality, it doesn't work that way. And so I think what we're seeing here is, as the prosecution, I think they've gotten a lot out of Cassie for the racketeering. They got all these predicate acts. You know, they've got the arson on Kit Cudi's car. They've got her alleged rape. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, if there's going to be a text message that's going to negate that, but she alleges she was raped by Diddy. They've got the domestic violence, which you don't have to believe Cassie. Look, we showed you video of that incident multiple times, right? And so I'm afraid of that.
The problem you've got, Sara, you're still, like I say, I would just wait until I see
I agree with you. I agree with you, but I also think
that's what the judge tells the jurors, and just wait, because yesterday I heard a lot of stuff on people. You know, part of the problem with the legal analysts, and myself included, is we look at these things like an ESPN, you know, who's ahead, first quarter, second quarter, and that's, the jurors are told, you can't decide until you've heard everything, and I'd caution people, wait and hear everything.
So, Mark, let's talk about that. You say wait. What are we waiting for? And what I mean by that is the core of the charges here are built on RICO and racketeering. So if you're an audience member looking here, what else does the prosecution need to bring forward? Who are the witnesses? What kind of testimony do we need to see to make those really substantive charges, stick? What are we expecting?
Well, look, you can have, part of what the argument is if you've got domestic violence, does that mean that you were supporting the enterprise? Or does that mean you were supporting the racketeering? Does it mean, the part of the conundrum that is here for the prosecution is, and I'm sure you're going to see this later on, is this case a revisionist history? Meaning, are we looking back 10, 20 years, and are we trying to rewrite history? Because in a lot of ways, Sean Combs, as everybody knows, Sean Combs was the biggest star on the planet in the 90s and the early 2000s. This supposed conspiracy starts in 2004. He was wildly successful before 2004. So it's almost turning the world on its head in terms of what the prosecutorial theory is here. The judge is going to give instructions. He's going to tell the jurors, you just concentrate on what's shown in the courtroom, and here is the law, and you have to apply the facts as you see them.
But Mark, here's the problem. I, as the AUSA, have come in and have completely made Diddy into the most hated man ever. This jury is disgusted with him. And, that's where I think the concern should be on the defense's part, that it makes it easier for the jury to not give him the benefit of the doubt, even though I think the defense is doing a good job so far casting doubt. I think he has become so...
I don't disagree with you. Think about how many cases, Sara, you and I have either tried or defended where we have what I affectionately call the prosecutorial character assassination block of evidence. I can't tell you how often that we just deal with, and the judge is supposed to keep out, and most judges do. They do the balancing act. They say, is this just so prejudicial and not so probative that I'm going to
Mark,
exclude it?
You have to admit, there's nothing prejudicial about that video. They don't have to go back 20 years and when they look at a video right in front of them of Sean Combs, assaulting her I mean, how does a jury get past that? I mean, clearly this isn't a good guy.
Well,
clearly this is a problem. So how does won't they want to convict him of something?
Or how do they get past the urination in her mouth? And now we know she signed up for it. But, I mean, they're so disgusted and disturbed by this, according to reports like by Laura and other reporters, that is what I think the defense should be concerned with, is that no matter how much doubt they cast, this jury is like, this guy's a monster, and.
Mark, do you suspect that you'll see some of Diddy's old colleagues have to take the stand on, for the racketeering and the RICO aspects of this?
Well, one of the things that we've seen so far is that all of the kind of smart money turned out to be not so smart about this case. I can't tell you how many times in the last year people have come up to me and talked about A-list celebrities, talked about tapes that were out there of, I won't even mention the names because I don't want to tarnish the various people, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of noise, if you will. And now you're seeing that, no, that isn't what this case is about. This case is about two long-term girlfriends. And to your point about the things that make people uncomfortable, I guess I'm so old that I remember when talking about people's sex lives in their privacy of their own, in this case, hotel room, was nothing you wanted. You didn't want the government in your bedroom. Mm-hmm. I remember, Sununu, when you were, a hardcore Republican, that was the Republican mantra, keep the government out of my bedroom. So there is a tendency, I think, to be disgusted, but at the same time, who wants their sex life put under a microscope?
Not me. I'll tell you that. And I think I speak for everyone. Let's keep government out of all of it, because there's nothing good that definitely comes of it, without a doubt. Yeah. Look, there's a long way to go here. I think it's going to be pretty riveting. Cannot thank you both, Sara, Mark, two of the brightest minds that have been on the front lines of these types of criminal cases and in a federal court, nonetheless. Can't thank you guys enough for having expert testimony here. Thank you. Okay, up next, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. I know you all know it by heart, right? But I don't have to read it to you, but I will. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. But today, President Trump took his effort to ban birthright citizenship for the children of illegal immigrants who were born in the United States. He took it to the Supreme Court. Did the court buy the argument? Two of the most well-known constitutional scholars in the country will break it down. Coming up next. What is birthright citizenship? Well, the 14th Amendment states all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. But on President Trump's first day in office, he issued an executive order banning birthright citizenships for children born to illegal aliens. But the court swiftly put a nationwide injunction on his ban. Well, what's an injunction? How does that work? Well, it's the lower court's way of stopping President Trump's executive orders. So he took the case to the Supreme Court, and today his administration made its case for President Trump to continue his ban on birthright citizenship. And they also asked the court to stop nationwide injunctions against his administration. Trump-appointed Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, well, he was pretty vocal and deeply skeptical of their argument. Take a listen.
What do hospitals do with a newborn? What do states do with a newborn?
I don't think they do anything different. What the executive order says in Section 2 is that federal officials do not accept documents that have the wrong designation of citizenship from people who are subject to the executive order.
How are they going to know that?
The states can continue to, the federal officials will have to figure that out.
How?
So you could imagine a number of ways that the federal officials could.
Such as
They could require a showing of, documentation showing legal presence in the country.
for all the newborns? Is that how that's going to work?
Again, we don't know.
Well, joining me now, Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and the author of The Preventive State, Alan Dershowitz, and a man who's been on the forefront of banning birthright citizenship for decades, Trump's former attorney, John Eastman. Gentlemen, thank you guys both for joining me.
Thanks.
You bet.
Thank you,
So,
Chris.
Alan, if we could start with you, this issue of citizenship really being enjoined with the concept of whether or not we can have injunctions from the federal court. Is the case being made? Is it too enjoined? Can they actually deal with both of these issues at the same time?
No, I don't think so. I think they're going to decide the injunction issue, and they're probably going to put off deciding on the injunction issue. They all missed the point. Here you had 4 judges, all of whom ruled that the executive order was unconstitutional. But what if 2 judges had ruled it was unconstitutional? 2 judges ruled it was constitutional. Who do you follow? That's the problem. Or what if 20 judges ruled it was unconstitutional and 1 judge ruled it was constitutional, but that 1 judge is in California, the biggest state. So I don't know how they're going to get around this. The way to get around this is by legislation. Let Congress create a new court, like the FISA court, 5 judges that can handle claims for a national injunction. They would have to decide it within a short period of time and then automatic appeal to the Supreme Court, and that would avoid the issue. As far as birthright citizenship is concerned, it seems to me the issue is simple. It's up to Congress. Probably alone can't say that these kids are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, but Congress can easily pass a statute saying that any child born of parents who then leave the United States within a certain period of time are not subject to the jurisdiction. And once they're not subject to the jurisdiction, they are not covered by the 14th Amendment.
Now, John, you've been on the forefront of this for a long time. I can imagine you were hearing some of the arguments being made. You were probably dying to jump in there yourself, without a doubt. Do you think they did a good job? Do you think they carried that narrative through to both answer the Supreme Court justices' questions and make their case at the same time?
Well, I agree with Alan on one thing. I think they're going to decide the injunction issue here and not the merits of the birthright citizenship claim. But during his rebuttal argument, General Sauer actually got up and said, Justice Sotomayor, you're wrong. She said this has been settled for 100 years. It's not been. There has been no Supreme Court case that has decided the question on whether the children of temporary visitors or illegal immigrants are automatic citizens. The one case that actually had a holding on this dealt exclusively with the children of lawfully and permanently domiciled parents. Everything else in that case was dicta. And the historical record, subject to the jurisdiction, is something that's confusing for us now, but it was not confusing for the people that drafted that amendment. It meant subject to the complete jurisdiction. They called it partial jurisdiction if you were just subject to our laws, such everybody within our borders is subject to our laws. But the drafters of that language were asked specifically, do you mean partial or do you mean full? And they said, we mean full. That's what it means, not subject to any other foreign power. And what Trump has done here is said that's what the original meaning meant. But we're not going to get to that in this particular phase of the case. We're going to deal with whether a single judge in Seattle and another single judge in Boston can issue a nationwide injunction that applies to people who are not parties to the case before him, and whether that violates Article 3's requirement that the courts only have authority over cases or controversies. That means to the parties to the dispute before them.
So, Alan, there seems to be some agreement here that they'll likely decide what to do on the injunctions. They will punt away the citizenship issue, but that's the issue people are really looking at. What happens to that issue? Does it go back to the lower courts? Is it something that can come back in some form, or is it only Congress can deal with it at this point?
No, I think it will percolate, and I think we're going to see decisions going the other way. For example, on the issue of partial jurisdiction, we now recognize that you can be a dual citizen of the United States and of Canada, of the United States and Israel. So you're subject to the laws both of Israel and of the United States. And so the question comes up, if you are subject to the laws of 2 jurisdictions, are you subject exclusively to the laws of the United States to become a citizen? These are all very complicated issues, and they should be resolved by Congress. When you have in a constitution constitutional amendment and an opportunity for Congress to resolve it, they ought to do that. So I think, look, Professor Eastman is a great, great constitutional lawyer, and it's a thrill to be on the same show with him because he is so smart and knows so much constitutional law. And in the end, he's probably right on this thing. But and the vast majority of Americans, by the way, agree with him and agree with John that they don't want to see citizenship granted to somebody who was born here, was here for a week, and then his parents left by the accident of birth. The 14th Amendment is actually very poorly drafted, as is much of the Constitution. I have a cartoon that I keep on my desk. It's a wonderful cartoon. It says, one of the founders says, just for fun, let's make what isn't constitutional kind of wishy-washy. And that's what they've done.
Well, again, hoping that Congress takes up a complicated and tough issue. Good luck with that. I think we both know there's little hope on either side. Gentlemen, cannot thank you guys enough for joining us. We'll see where this goes in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much. Take care.
All right, coming up. Has all hope for peace between Ukraine and Russia, has it completely fallen apart? Well, I don't think any of us want to think that, but the two key leaders had planned to meet in Turkey today to begin those peace talks, but Putin, well, he ghosted Zelensky. He decided not to show. Trump says nothing's going to happen until he meets with Putin. So are we at a stalemate as more lives are lost? Every single day, lives are being lost. Stalemate is the last thing anyone wants to see. A man who knows the politics and the players, coming up next.
Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together.
If he's not going, well, I'm not going. But if he goes, then maybe I'll go. But then, he has to go if I go. Look, it sounds more like organizing a high school party than peace talks to end the war between Ukraine and Russia. It's two leaders, Zelensky and Putin. Well, they were supposed to meet in Turkey today, but the Russian president did a full ghosting, and he decided not to show up at all. So, is there any hope of a peace deal to end the war that has truly become the deadliest European conflict since World War II? Let's ask former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Governor, it's great to be here.
So look, let's start here. They were going to go. Putin doesn't show up. Zelensky ends up going. Was this strategic or was it bad coordination on the back end?
No, I think it's a problem that Putin had. So remember, the Europeans last weekend said, Putin, if you don't come to the table and agree to a ceasefire for 30 days, then we're going to put sanctions on you. And they coordinated that threat of sanctions with President Trump. That was on the table. Putin got worried. And he said, well, we have to change the subject, have to do something. He suggested on Sunday that they have this meeting on Thursday in Turkey. Zelensky quickly called his bluff. Zelensky called his bluff and said, fine, let's have this conversation. I'll meet you in Turkey. In fact, I'll be waiting for you in Turkey. And Putin then was rattled. He had no idea what to do. It took him 3 days to figure out who he was going to send. Would he go? Would he not go? And during that time, you're exactly right, Governor. President Trump says, I could probably be there. I'm in the region. I could be there. And so you're right to say that Putin ghosted Zelensky, but I think Putin also ghosted Trump.
Now, the president, in response, one thing I found very interesting, he said, look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I talk. Doesn't that kind of put a lot of pressure on President Trump now to kind of make the next move, to have that conversation? Isn't the world saying, okay, then pick up the phone tomorrow morning?
I think you're right. I think it's exactly right. I think that President Trump has indicated he's in. He's involved.
Yeah.
He's going to make this work. And so he's got a lot. I think he's got a lot of influence over Putin. And I think he can make that happen. He does have to keep Zelensky in the game. You got to have the person, the country, the president of the country that has been attacked. Got to be part of those discussions. But I think you're right. President Trump now is involved. He's not walking away.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. You got to keep Zelensky in the game. Talk to me a little bit. You've been there in Kiev. You've been the ambassador to Ukraine. What is the is there pressure from the Ukrainian people on Zelensky? What's the attitude over there from the general populace that might be driving Zelensky to make sure that something gets done in the short term?
Yeah, Governor, I was just there last week. And that was my 10th visit since the big war started. So I've stayed in touch with Ukrainians. And what I can say for sure is that Zelensky and the Ukrainian people are like one. There's no daylight between the people, and there's no. He wants the same thing they want. They want what he wants. And what it is peace. They do want a ceasefire. They are tired, Governor. They are tired. They're not exhausted. They're determined, but they are tired. They've been fighting for, 3 years and 2 months against the Russian army and holding them off. They are tired. They want peace. However, they do not want to be under Putin. They do not want to be under the Russians. They are very proud that they're an independent, sovereign nation on the way to joining Europe. And they won't give that. Neither Zelensky nor people will want to give that up.
Well, without a doubt, this is a key conflict, not just for Russia and Ukraine, but for the entire world, right? When you look at the economic issues, the life issues. So, Bill, I cannot thank you enough. You've been there on the ground. We're going to keep coming to you time and time again until this thing gets resolved. We appreciate all of that kind of insight. Thank you, guys. We'll be right back.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining.
All right. I want to thank Chris Cuomo for letting me fill in his seat tonight. As we all know, Chris doesn't like to be away from the chair for too long, so he'll be back tomorrow after he wraps up his first responder training. On Balance with Leland Vittert starts right now.